There is a tall tale among Filipino elders that you shouldn't come home directly after attending a wake, but rather stop by at your local 7-Eleven. The reason? Spirits. They say that spirits would cling to you, and in order to not follow you home, you must go someplace else to confuse them. This superstition was interpreted in the film Pagpag Siyam na Buhay, and just as how the belief itself is also called Pagpag, it is but one of the many Filipino superstitions that ultimately make up Philippine horror cinema. Philippine horror cinema has been around for decades, with Gerardo de Leon's Terror is a Man being noted as the first film to initiate the genre. Notable pioneers also included Lino Broca with his 1960 film Gabi ng Lagim, Enrico Ilarde with works like Sa Ilalim ng Kogon and Babaeng Putik. More serious horror films naturally follow a desaturated look. It's bleak and grim, typical of any horror film similarly found in the West. But when I say serious, I mean it's just one type of subgenre in Filipino horror. Filipino horror films also mix itself with the more famous genre of comedy. Everyone loves a good laugh, and local comedies with the usual slapstick humor are very popular in the country. Filipino horror comedy similarly doesn't stray away from the already established comedic tropes. It often relies on the misfortunes and clumsiness of the characters while giving it a supernatural twist. But no matter the style, Filipino horror films grounded themselves in the common elements of the supernatural. Even before the invention of film, the Chinese and the Japanese had a lot of influence on Philippine folklore and urban legends. This influence carries on until today when folklore finds itself on the big screen. Feng Shui tells the story of a woman who is imperiled by death after she hangs a bagua, or a charm found in some Chinese households. Similarly, the Japanese film The Grudge became the foundation of many Filipino films with a stringy-haired ghost girl. Besides the usual ghosts and ghouls and demons, Filipino horror films also have their own monstrous antagonists. In Shake, Rattle, and Roll 10, a manananggal or a vampire with only an upper body, huge bat-like wings, and a long needle-like tongue tries to suck on an unborn baby's blood like how manananggals usually do. Pamahiin and Mag-ingat ka sa kulam have the mangkukulam, or a conjurer or a witch. Albularyos or witch doctors are similar to mangkukulam. In The Healing, starring award-winning actor Vilma Santos, a faith healer becomes the talk of the town, but her healing methods can only be acquired if people paid a hefty price. Then there's the Encanto. In Tenement 2, an Encanto, or Enchanted One in Spanish, is an immortal creature who can shapeshift into a human. They are described to have silvery and wavy faces with long straight hair and white clothing. They could also be seen wearing black and would usually only show their true appearances after marrying a human. There is a notable distinction between Western and Eastern horror films. Instead of the usual slasher flick like Candyman or Friday the 13th, Eastern films lean more on the supernatural. And because the Philippines is the only predominantly Christian nation in Asia, a lot of its religious beliefs and superstitions became a mainstay in its own horror genre. Just like how the film Pagpag revolves around the superstition of the same name, Sukob does as well. Sukob is an old superstition that one should not marry in the same year that an immediate family dies, or that siblings should not marry in the same year, or else bad luck will befall the couple. Filipino films are never subtle with religious imagery. Even recent films like Eerie and Seclusion revolve their stories around religion. In Seclusion, aspiring priests are sent to live in seclusion, but their peace was soon interrupted by a mysterious young girl. Eerie, on the other hand, gave life to the many stories of haunted dwellings in Catholic schools. With all these styles and narratives that eventually make up the identity of Philippine horror cinema, why did it decline as fast as it reached its peak? Philippine cinema is never short of critics, even during its early days. In 1929, the Philippine legislature imposed a board censorship for moving pictures, limiting both foreign and local distribution, but it wasn't enough to bring it down. Much of its decline was mostly due to three reasons that circle around each other. The lack of support for Filipino filmmakers. The Philippine government's refusal to invest in culture and arts led its own film industry to fall behind in technologically advanced film equipment. This ultimately led to the mass migration of expert and budding filmmakers that could potentially change the course of the genre and Philippine cinema as a whole. That said, this left us with half-baked recycled storylines and a poor handling of characters and their narratives, which eventually pushed the genre down the drain. A lot of films started overusing cliches such as featuring long stringy-haired ghosts, coupled with poor CGI monsters resulted to low turnout rates in cinemas. The lack of appeal of the genre resulted to local audiences favoring Hollywood films even more. The preference for Hollywood-produced films has always been there ever since American colonizers started to distribute their own films in the island during the early 20th century. But American film distribution continues to rise even more when Filipinos started to see the huge difference between industries, turning towards more advanced films with state-of-the-art technology and novel narratives, leaving the local genre in the dust. Because Filipino filmmakers noticed a sharp decline with the appeal of local horror, they tried to go through other alternatives that go against the generic studio formula. Eduardo Dayao's debut film Violator is a stylistic psychological horror film that follows through a series of supernatural phenomena after Manila got struck by a typhoon. Its almost apocalyptic nature cuts through different narratives, each without having to do with one another. A police officer throws herself from the window, a corpse with a pig's head, friends lighting themselves on fire, the execution of a drug pusher, and a mass suicide. Dodo Dayao leaves behind the traditional jump scares and opts for creating a looming sense of dread among the audience. Sequences of grainy VHS tapes in between cuts of extremely saturated cinematic shots forms a stylistic hybrid that paved for a more novel outlook on the genre. The film Salvage attempts to take on the found footage style solidified by the Blair Witch Project. But it wasn't shot on a 16mm or a high 8. Instead, the film looked more like a documentary shot with modern DSLRs, save for a number of camera glitches here and there. And appropriately so, as it follows a news team investigating rumors of aswang killings in a remote barrio in the rural country. Things start to become more interesting when we realize the story happened throughout most of the day in broad daylight, something that is quite uncommon in most horror films. Eerie, a film by Michael Red and one that has gained a tremendous reach with the local audience, revisits old tropes of Filipino horror films. The story follows a guidance counselor who is also a clairvoyant being haunted by the ghost of a young girl. It's heavy on religious undertones, with the story taking place in an all-girl Catholic school and has quite a number of jump scares. But even in that sense, Red continues to fascinate the audience with an art house style despite being produced by a major production company. The film leaves an even bigger impression when it doubles as a social commentary on religious repression most Philippine schools are known for. Philippine horror cinema continues to evolve with every film. It's a complex genre to navigate through since the audience's expectations and demands are high. But its recent resurgence has given Filipino filmmakers a whole new realm to cross, between tropes and narratives forming various kinds of hybrid films. The industry has a long way to go, and in hopes that we could reach new heights, it's up to us to start supporting our local film industry.